Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Security Solutions TV. And today we are speaking with Angus McDougall from Entrust. Angus, welcome to the program.
Appreciate the invitation.
Now, Angus, there are probably plenty of people who are watching this because cybersecurity has become a thing and everyone's familiar with the importance of it these days. To what extent is debatable. So I'm sure most people have probably heard the name Entrust. But for those people who might have heard the name but don't necessarily know what it is that the company does, can you give us a bit of background on Entrust? Who are you? What do you do? What sort of clientele do you serve, and the rest?
So since 1969, our roots have been in payments and identity. And we were originally established by a request from Visa, who commissioned our engineers to initiate the design of a high-speed card personalization market for the burgeoning credit card market. And at that point in time, we did that. We then commercialized the concept, and basically to this day, that's been a very important part of our business, the initiation of card procurement, card personalization systems. And if you look at the situation, say, for example, yourself, John, in Australia, I'd say there's a very good chance that every financial card in your wallet is personalized on an Entrust machine. So it's been an important part of our heritage, and we're certainly building our roots since then. Now, in 2013, we broadened our portfolio by acquiring the Entrust organization, and this gave us access to a broad-based level of security offerings, and it was a critical adjunct to what we've historically done in payments and identity. Now, we've since broadened that base by rebranding the company in 2021 under the brand Entrust, and so this is how we take it forward. And basically, our mandate can be best summarized as enabling trusted identities, payments, and data. So whether it may be remote logging on to a corporate network, whether it's working with government on e-services, or simply conducting a contactless transaction at the point of sale for your morning cup of coffee, that's what we really focus on and what we've done. Now, to answer your question on who do we serve, historically that's been banks and government. But in more recent times, with the acquisition of Entrust, we have broadened that base to large-scale support of commercial organizations around the world, educational institutions. Basically, any commercial organization utilizes or is in the market to utilize applications and platforms from ourselves.
Your organization recently released a report titled "The Future of Identity." What can you tell me about that report from the point of view of it revealed some truths about password use and how people are using passwords and all the rest of it? Can you expand on that a little bit for us? Because this is one of those contentious points. I know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on passwords, and a lot of people sort of grudgingly, I have to change it every 30 days or whatever it may be. What are some of the biggest trends and challenges that are appearing?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we commissioned this report in December of 2022. It was released in the middle of March, so it's very current. There's a data was acquired in the first quarter of this year. 1,450 consumers around the world, of which 400 were Asia-Pacific based, and there were 4 countries from Asia-Pacific which were represented in the survey, that being Australia, of course, Japan, Indonesia, and Singapore. And what we found from this was that there was a significant trend towards that passwords are moving out and biometrics are coming in, because people are looking for basically convenient but secure experiences, whether interacting with retailers or interacting with government, and they're looking for that sort of assurance that their transaction will be undertaken with a degree of security. So it's certainly been a revelation to us that it was such a strong support for biometrics. And as you've said, John, there's been a strong emphasis from the community at large towards people encouraging people to change their passwords and making them more complex as time goes on. And there is certainly a trade-off between convenience and security. But as we see, as technology evolves, we're seeing that biometrics are becoming more and more important. And importantly, it's actually based on, or what we're seeing is that this trend is prevalent in the younger members of the community. So certainly Gen Z and millennials feel very comfortable with biometrics. But in fact, what we're seeing with the older generation, whether it's boomers or other generations, we're seeing that they actually prefer passwords and begrudgingly adhere to putting in more complex passwords at the respect of the institution that they're dealing with. And this is not dissimilar to what we saw, and I was in the ATM business back in the 90s, but we saw this, when ATMs first went mainstream in the late 80s and the 90s, we saw that the older generation was still very, very comfortable with wanting to actually interact with tellers and were quite comfortable in standing in queues, whereas the younger generation were absolutely moving towards a self-service device and appreciated the time and convenience of being able to access cash whenever they needed it. In more recent times, we've seen this manifest itself, particularly post-pandemic, that contactless transactions have become all the rage. So again, the typical tap and go transaction at the point of sale with merchants for your morning coffee or whatever it may be. And this is becoming more and more prevalent in our business. But certainly the survey reveals some interesting points around what people are looking for in security. And I think there's also an acceptance around the fact that personal data is a cost that comes with interacting in the current environment and being able to access these services and so forth. So it's interesting as time goes on that attitudes are evolving.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I remember back in the early 2000s, you mentioned that you were in the ATM business previously, and I know that a number of banks trialed biometric trials on ATMs, and it didn't pan out very well back in the early 2000s, because I think as we get older, and I know I'm getting older, as we get older, we have a lot of unconscious bias and rusted on principles around things that we grew up with and what we knew and what we identified with. And I think people in my generation, sort of, 50, 40, that sort of, group and older, have a very different concept of privacy to people who are in their 20s and 30s and so on now. Do you think a lot of the reluctance around biometrics has got to do with a lot of the misinformation that currently exists around biometrics, around things like, they'll keep my face print, or they'll be able to reverse engineer my fingerprint and steal all of my money, and all these ridiculous things that just aren't true?
It is evolving. And there is becoming an acceptance by consumers, and again, this will be led by the younger generations, that they're keen to incorporate these sorts of techniques, provided it provides a more secure but still convenient environment. And that's the trade-off that we're talking about. So there's no question that will come into play as time goes on.
In the context of identity, in a more sort of modern environment like we're talking about now, a government, in your opinion, doing enough to protect the average user, the average member of the public?
I'll speak from my own experience, because I've been a resident of Singapore for more than 25 years, and I've been really impressed with the steps that they've taken to incorporate a national digital identity framework that allows people to, one, prove who they are, and then undertake the transaction at the point of sale or point of service with the minimum level of or maximum level of convenience, I should say. And they initiated a platform called SingPass a year or two back, and that incorporates two-factor authentication, incorporates biometrics through facial techniques, and then things like fraud analytics to give an extra level of assurance that the transaction is going through in a secure fashion. And what it does is SingPass gives you access to 2,000 different e-government digital services. But it is really a fantastic platform to provide the consumer the assurance that they're looking for. Now, as you know, in your part of the world, we've had the 100-point check since 2006. And of course, in 2006, it was certainly a reasonable framework, but it's 17 years hence, things have evolved. And I think SingPass that sort of platform is a way to go to incorporate that level of thinking and provide people the assurance that they're looking for. Now, that also has been an evolving concept with the Singapore government. They had problems with the first generation of this platform a few years ago, but they took those problems on, incorporated changes to the platform, and came out with a much more robust product. And every time I use this product in interacting with government, it proves to me this is a fantastic mechanism to prove to the government I am who I say I am, at the same time giving me the assurance it's all being done in a safe and secure environment.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because, I mean, I guess there's a lot of people who would look at this and might question, well, how is my identity, my online identity, the responsibility of the government? Surely that's a consumer's responsibility to make sure that they monitor, manage, and protect their online identity. But then you look at things like government-issued documents from the point of view of driver's licenses, Medicare cards, passports, And it does kind of bring it back into that government domain because I imagine, I know I can only speak from my own experience, we develop a certain level of expectation from our corporate providers where I want my bank card to work on my phone. I don't want to have to carry around an ATM card anymore. I want my private health insurance to be accessed digitally. I want all of these other things to be accessed digitally. The government kind of needs to move into that space as well, but that inherently then means that the government needs to take the lead on these things, I suppose, where we would typically expect corporate entities to be at the forefront previously, because if they're going to put government identities on there, they have to make sure that they're secure. But there's always going to be that contentious issue in this country anyway around, is this the Australia Card 2.0? I mean, how, if you're the government, do you manage that?
So we've seen in recent times, for example, in Australia, Mr. Albanese, the Prime Minister, talking about a digital identity framework that he would like to initiate, and certainly a lot of publicity in the context of recent commercial breaches of a major fashion in the Australian environment. So, I think it's one of those things that as time goes on, and we saw this within a survey actually, that 70% of the consumers said they were comfortable in terms of providing the government authority access to their personal data, provided there is a reasonable level of assurance that it will be safe. Now, there's still 30% who say they're not comfortable under any circumstance, but I would say those figures are way up since previous years. And you made reference to the Australia Card a few years ago. There's been two initiatives by respective Australian governments, both Liberal and Labor, in past years. The Australia Card was the first, and the Access Card in 2000, I think it was 2008 or 9, but somewhere around there. And both times these initiatives didn't get up because of the fact that people were very concerned about what would happen with the data, how would it be used, and so forth. But as in the ensuing 14 or 15 years since the Access Card initiation took place, I think there has been a change of circumstances, and the situation has been with these major commercial breaches that have occurred in Australia and elsewhere around the world, people are coming to the realization that they've got to provide something has to change. And the trade-off may well be the willing giving up of your personal details to a government authority who can guarantee the security of that data, and then you get access to a more secure environment. And I'd use a single example simply because as a citizen, I find I'm very comfortable in terms of undertaking transactions anywhere in Singapore because the level of assurance, and I can see the steps that the government has gone to provide a best-in-class platform to provide that level of assurance.
It's actually a great segue into my next question, because I want to come back to the breaches that we've seen happen here in Australia over the last 12 months. Do you think that that's, from a user point of view, had a positive or a negative impact? Because obviously when you see these large-scale cybersecurity breaches, for those people who may have been hesitant previously about moving to a more cloud-based cyber environment, that's just going to reconfirm a lot of their fears. So are you seeing changes in the way people are viewing cybersecurity and their awareness of cybersecurity and attitudes towards cyber as a result of these large-scale breaches?
I've just come back from Australia a week or so ago, and I was, an avid consumer of media, whether it be radio, whether newspapers, online. But I was surprised at how much publicity is being given to the various scams that have been going on in the environment. I mean, clearly there's an effort by the media as well as government institutions to educate people. And this culminated for me last Saturday week in the Herald Sun in Melbourne. There was a 3-page spread on a Carlton footballer, Jacob Wiedering, who had a sit-down interview with the Herald Sun alongside the CEO of one of the big four Australian banks, and talked about his personal experience of what he went through to be a victim of a scam, and which cost him dearly. And he wanted people to learn from his mistakes, and obviously the bank wanted to present their position in the best possible light, so the CEO was along for the ride as well. But it was a really interesting insight in the fact that here's a prominent member of the community in Victoria who's coming forward and saying, this is embarrassing to say, but it happened to me, and it could happen to you. So please be on the lookout and be wary. And it is a series of constant educational process. And this is why I think that the attitudes towards something like a digital identity network, the time is ripe for it in Australia, John, where it hasn't been in previous years with the Australia card and the Access card and so forth. And I think that as people are realising now, something has to change. And this could well be it. So I think it's a great initiative by Mr. Albanese and the government to try and get this off the ground.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people who might be sort of looking at some of this stuff with a little bit of trepidation and some hesitation to understand that this is not new. It's just shifted domain. A lot of this stuff has existed for years. I remember back in probably the early 2000s, I was fortunate enough to sit down with a person by the name of Frank Abagnale, who was the basis of the movie Catch Me If You Can, Does by Disney with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. And he was one of the greatest con men of the late 20th centuries. And again, he explained that social engineering and document fraud were rife back then. Some of the scams that he perpetrated to get people to give up money or whatever the case may be, my point being, it's not new. So it really is that piece of, to me at least anyway, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, it's the combination of being able to provide robust mechanisms to detect, identify, deter cybersecurity from corporate and government points of view. But as you alluded to earlier, it really is the education piece as well, because in the case of the footballer that you mentioned earlier, anyone who's familiar with cybersecurity and scams was listening to that, just seeing red flag after red flag after red flag, thinking, why did you do some of the things that you did? And no, nothing against the poor footballer that was scammed. It's just, unless you know the warning signs and you know what to look for, it's easy to fall prey to these things. And it doesn't matter how good the cybersecurity mechanisms are, you need to have the education piece in there as well. Is that correct?
No, that's exactly right. It's an incredibly important part. And this is why I was actually so impressed, having spent a week in Australia, with the level of coverage in the media and trying to educate people, because, it's like, Frank's story goes back to the 1960s when he was changing checks and misrepresenting himself in various ways. But as you know, he also became an advisor to the FBI in later years, and then became a prominent speaker on the circuit in relation to fraud management and what institutions could do to try and control that. But education of the community is just so important, and I think the Australian media is doing a pretty reasonable job in terms of getting the message out there, because it is a worry we've all got parents, the older generation. This is all new to them, and when somebody calls them out of the blue and says, "I'm from XYZ Telecom, and I need to get access to your system to address a fraud situation that you may have," so that you can trust no one, and you need to say, well, that's fine. I've got a number here I can call. I'll call your number and take it forward from there with your people. But I have no idea who you are, so thank you very much and good day to you, and then move on. But it's like, this is rife, and it's been going on since as long as I can remember. But there's been some sort of initiatives by miscreants trying to work around the system, but it's burgeoning now. And the numbers that are being published for scams and identity theft in Australia, I think, are sort of way down from what they actually are. I think they're much larger, and oftentimes people are too embarrassed to say, this has happened to me. And that's why I was so impressed with the footballer who came out. He's an educated and articulate person, came out, "I want to tell my story and try and help other people in the community," which is a fantastic initiative.
Yeah. And look, just from my own personal experience, I know recently I decided I would try and sell something online using one of the online marketplaces I hadn't tried previously. And in the first week, I had 10 inquiries, and every single one of them was a scam without fail. Every single one. Now, I think that leads me to my next point. What with deep fakes and artificial intelligence and everything that's going on at the moment, making it even harder for people to rely on traditional sources of what's true and what's not. We're really sort of coming into that era of ABC, and I don't mean ABC TV. I mean, assume nothing, believe no one, check everything. So given that context, what's on the horizon for Entrust? What new and exciting developments have you got coming out that might help with this that you can possibly share with us?
Well, this is certainly a burgeoning market, John. We're seeing Last year, the market globally was worth about $28 billion and will grow to $70 billion by 2027. So we're on a growth trajectory like everyone else in this marketplace. We've been very active in acquisitions, which really started with Entrust in 2013, but there's been a dozen or more acquisitions since then that we've taken on board, and we'll continue down that path. And what we're seeing in the US, I'm in the US at the moment, what we're seeing is that it's actually a very good time to be looking at acquisitions, because liquidity that was there in the market for early stage startups has dried up somewhat, and they're looking for a path to monetize their investment. So it's a good time to be looking at this sort of thing and bringing in new technologies that may be an adjunct to what we already do. So we're very active in that space. Not just in the security elements, but also in things like digital cards. So complementing the physical offerings that we've historically provided to banks and different service bureaus around the world. And also most recently in identity verification for travelers. So we've just been the beneficiary of a very large contract from the United Kingdom Home Office, which is to allow seamless travel for people using electronic travel authorizations for 30 million citizens over the course of the next 12 months. And this is a huge initiative by us. We acquired a company called WorldReach back in 2019 and been working with them to take this product forward on a global basis. And we're seeing the fruits of that labor now with things like the United Kingdom Home Office contract. So there's a lot coming up. We're in a very good space in the market. We're doing everything we can to try and provide the requisite structure for people to undertake transactions and prove their identities as safely and as conveniently as possible. So it's a good place to be in the market, but certainly, as you will attest to, it's a growing market, and there's opportunities ahead of us.
Well, look, Angus, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And for anyone who wants to know more about Entrust, you can see the website details on the bottom of the screen as you're watching the end of this. So thank you very much for your time. Safe travels.
Great to meet you, and all the best.
And we look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thanks again. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe and be secure.